Acho Labai, Labai Smuggle. Thank you very much for having me. Uh, thank you. And like mentioned, we will go into the coffee break ever so slightly by 10 or 15 minutes. This said I could blame him. It's not really his fault. It's just the schedule is being shuffled, so you will have time for coffee, I promise. So today we're going to talk about AI agency. As developers, we decide the future. So I'm just going to note, no AI was used in the preparation or creation of this talk. Sometimes there's a little bit of a disclaimer, but these days you sometimes don't know about that. But this here, as you can see, is Kit, Mozilla's new mascot that you'll probably see running around Firefox if you use it. And while the values are shared by Mozilla, those that I share today specifically are my own, but obviously shared by a lot of concerned technologists. I'm going to start with my grandmother, Emilia, and my senalis Jurgis. The reason why I bring them up is that my grandmother, who was born in 1923 in Iniqche, who then emigrated to Canada during the Second World War, passed away a couple years ago. And to frame a life as a comparison to how much technological progress can shift. There was no electricity or running water in her home. It was the age of letters, telegraphs, simple communication. And she lived through revolutions in telephony and the internet. And by the time she was very old, I would speak to her on FaceTime and Skype. Technologies that to her seemed almost impossible to conceive of at the time of her life. So, a little bit of a poll. Who's worried about the future? Raise your hand. Yeah, you should be worried about the future, right? A lot of things seem out of control. Climate change is an impending danger. Obviously, jobs and economic financial security, democracy is in great threat. And this pretty much sums it up in a nutshell, more or less. I know this meme is often overused, but I feel it truly captures the sort of feeling that many of us have of powerlessness around what we are able to do to affect our futures. So it seems that any moment we are either on the precipice of a golden age, of a new era of prosperity and opportunity, but then simultaneously on one of total destruction and loss. So what really is happening here? Which of these two realities is true? And where are we destined to go? One particularly frustrating example of a future that I say we would likely want to avoid is the one that Artisans, an AI startup, if you could call it that, had a uh, ad campaign in New York City and raised $25 million of this. They basically said that you should stop hiring humans and instead hire our artisans. Artisans being people who are specialized and skilled in a particular ability. But the part of this that was actually most disturbing is that they said their mandate was to prevent the waste of human potential. They said that by eradicating jobs that waste people's time, supposedly, they were doing humanity a service. And my question is, what gave them the right to decide what jobs and what classes of people are unworthy of employment? What gives them the mandate to make this decision? They call it disruption, but in essence, it's truly destruction. Again, we've seen many newspapers cover tremendous amounts of job losses. And we're clearly not prioritizing a thoughtful transition in AI tools in the workspace. However, what's somewhat interesting about this is that a lot of these issues tend to be linked to AI, but are actually not directly caused by AI. We're still in the very early phases of LLM technologies being implemented in the workspace. But a lot of it is cover for overhiring during the pandemic era, poor business decisions, venture capital funding drying up during a period of higher interest rates. And yet AI is very often used as the excuse for this displacement, only to then turn around on the other side and hire people at lower wages as contractors. This is the ultimate danger. The goal is no longer about augmenting expertise and skill, it's about cutting costs. And we have to be very clear-eyed about this. This is the purview of governments, and it's also the purview of organized citizens to make this known. Because if we simply allow this fact to persist, we will truly be powerless. Now, I want to be clear. The truth is, none of us really know where any of this is going. And anyone who tells you with absolute certainty that they know what the future is, including myself, is lying. We truly don't know where things are going. However, what we can see now are emergent patterns that have replaced themselves in the past. Unlike crypto and NFTs or the metaverse, there is a lot more utility to large language models. We've seen today all of these incredible practical uses for this technology that's incredibly useful and has enormous potential. But the danger is the hype around those technologies and the sort of breathless deployment that we're seeing across America and the world is pulling us away from better implementations that could actually create AI that benefits all of us and empowers workers as opposed to disempowers them. I'm going to quote the famed American writer, thinker, and New York Times contributor Tessie McMillan Cotton, who said, "When people try to sell you on the idea that the future is already settled, it's because it's deeply unsettled. I think that this promise of an artificially intelligent future is really just a collective anxiety that the very wealthy, powerful people have about how well they are going to be able to control us in the future. If they can get us to accept that the future is already settled, AI is already here, the end is already here, then we will create that for them. My most daring idea is to refuse." So, who does this AI hype benefit the most? Of course, it augments our abilities and give us sort of superhuman skills that those of us had to learn, computer science the old-fashioned way of painfully dealing with compilers and learning code and going on Stack Overflow. But I mean more broadly, the entire AI industry. Who really is it benefiting? When the discourse around humans becoming obsolete or part of some permanent underclass, unless we openly embrace the technology, very often there's a conflation that we can somehow join that billionaire class. A billionaire class that's last year's top 10 billionaires grew their wealth by 698 billion in the past year. These people are unaccountable and disconnected from the normal reality that all of us live. Additionally, the super rich are ravaging the climate. So they're unscrupulous. They have very little concern, and they have demonstrated again and again that they do not have humanity in mind. Especially when we consider many of Sam Altman's statements around OpenAI being for the benefit of humanity. We've seen a drastic shift in their mandate away from that and singularly towards profit seeking at all costs. I want to bring up Christopher Wiley. Many of you may be familiar with him from the Cambridge Analytica scandal. He unveiled the campaigns, that the way that the Trump campaign had utilized Cambridge Analytica data through Russian disinformation campaigns to influence and sway the American election. If you haven't read about it or heard about it, I highly recommend you do. But in Coda Story, there's an excellent collection of interviews and articles called Captured, The Secret Behind Silicon Valley's AI Takeover. So he found himself stuck in Dubai during historic floods and storms. And as a result of not being able to get out from the airport, he was with a number of Silicon Valley elites at a party. So you can imagine, he sneaks into a bathroom and calls one of his journalist colleagues. "I don't know if you can hear me. I'm in a toilet at the event, and people here are talking about longevity, how to live forever, and also prepping for when revolt and society gets completely undermined." He had whispered into his phone, "You have in another part of the world a bunch of journalists talking about how to save democracy, and here you've got a bunch of tech guys thinking about how they can live past democracy. You're wading through knee-deep water, people are screaming everywhere, and then what do all these bros do? They organize a party. It's like the world is collapsing outside, you go outside, and these billionaires and centimillionaires are having a party," he said. "Dubai right now is a microcosm of the world. The world is collapsing outside, and these people are partying." So yes, it is not you that the majority of this AI hype is meant to benefit. The system is not currently thinking with humanity in mind, and that is very wrong. The problem is not us. And obviously, it's okay to be confused right now to think that how we collectively can stand up against this when we're just individuals, in some ways depending on our governments to try and regulate for us, which can very often be slow and sclerotic and ineffective at dealing with these very issues that we have. Corporations want you to think that purchasing another subscription service, buying another supplement, using their product in some way is going to be the solution. Integrating deeply into their workflows, completely changing the way that you work, simply for them, is the way to make it through this. Governments then also want you to believe that there's a dangerous other in some cases. We've seen the rise of authoritarianism throughout the world presently, that they want you to believe that your safety threatens you in a place inside of your hierarchy. They want you to believe that any problems you face in the reality of your life are in some cases sometimes not problems at all. If you simply distract yourself, focus on rights in front of you, everything will be okay. So I'm going to make a somewhat cheeky proposition here, and that AI, right now, it's kind of like a nonstick pan, like PFAS or Teflon. Has everyone heard of this? Yeah, right. It's an amazing substance, right? It's incredible. You can fry some eggs, and usually they'll burn the bottom of your pot, and you'll be frustrated. Um, PFAS, however, is a group of 12,000 different chemical compounds, many of which were generally not well researched before they were released to the human public. So, convenience is the first fact, that this amazing technology, whether it be AI or PFAS, is very convenient. It's very quick and easy to use. You can whip out your pan, fry some eggs, and you're done. No, you don't know it's poisoning you. Same with AI. You can just outsource something to ChatGPT, and you're good. There's less friction, literally and figuratively less friction. It's not acutely bad for us, right? One or two times you're using it, it's probably not a big deal. But eventually you're like, well, all these other pans and pots I have are terrible. I can just cook my eggs with this one, and it's easy to clean up every single time. And just like with AI, incrementally, you outsource one task, and then you outsource another. And then before you know it, instead of asking your friend for relationship advice, you're asking ChatGPT. Additionally, they're putting it in everything. They're putting it in every type of product, whether you're putting something in an oven, right? You'll have a PFAS nonstick cookie sheet. It's the same with AI. I don't know about you, but if I go book a hotel, I generally don't need an AI chatbot to help me to book a hotel. It's pretty simple, right? However many nights, where are you staying, right? How many people are staying with you? I don't need hotels.com chatbot to help me figure that out, right? And additionally, this is a civilizational experiment, right? This is being played out across the globe without really any verification. And that's really the same case with PFAS compounds, that they were essentially deployed into every type of industrial application. And yet we didn't really look at the consequences of doing so. So much so that it becomes incredibly difficult to imagine a world in which there is not PFAS. Every one of us has this in our bloodstream, right? And in a way, generative AI is creeping into the bloodstream of all of our technical systems. And obviously, there are cases where some of this makes sense, right? I mean, if you're in a kitchen, you need to clean up dishes really, really quickly, okay, right? And same with AI. There are times that, someone's cognitive load is exceptionally burdened. They've got kids, they've got a job, they've got a lot of things to worry about. Okay. But the judicious use of this technology is really the way we want to consider architecting and organizing our society. So we only often end up worrying about these things once it's too late. So I won't read this whole post, but this was Sam Altman talking about them adding erotica back because we made ChatGPT pretty restrictive, but now we figured it out. Now that we have been able to mitigate the serious mental health issues and have new tools, we are going to be able to safely relax the restrictions. Do you think they nailed it? As far as it goes with OpenAI, yeah, show of hands, do you think they've nailed it? Yeah, no, I thought so, right? But Sam Altman really likes to get out there and say these kinds of things that, yeah, now that we have solved emotional problems and emotional distress and technology not harming anybody, we're good. We can trust you as the user to be your own, moderator, more or less. So Silicon Valley has often managed to evade rational criticism through bullish claims. Not that Silicon Valley doesn't invent amazing things and that it doesn't create useful tools and new technologies that we all use. But there's a divergence between those that use the tools as engineers or workers, those that profit from the tools, and then those that use the tools in a non-technical manner. And that's the slight danger. We've already seen the civilizational experiment with social media, which has gone great, by the way. Facebook and then Twitter, X, totally no problems there. So there's no issue here. But I want to frame the lens that AI inherently is not neutral as a technology. So our values are very often expressed in code. Now, this doesn't mean a list comprehension is like, an avowal of your commitment to something. It's more so broadly what your code is doing. Are those values there by intention, or are they there by some default? Or worse yet, were they there and you never noticed? The goal obviously here is not to stop building AI, but it's to build it deliberately and to use it judiciously. One core issue with this is the question of accountability. Very often you'll hear, well, the AI did it. It went out of control, it did something crazy. It's not the designers, it's not the engineers that classified the people as criminals by accident and locked them up for a week. It's just the algorithm, right? Or they say the designers or executives who designed the training data and the algorithms that discriminated against job candidates. Well, Amazon's off the hook. It's not our fault. Something happened with the pipeline. We can't really explain it. This is no way to operate a civilization or a society. If we can simply create technology and there to be no mechanism for responsibility or governance, then we're in a very dangerous place. And of course, there are questions about how much we want to regulate technology, how much we want to delay progress, and how much we want to sort of unshackle it and allow it to go free. And that's a very complicated issue. I'm not advocating for one way or another, right? But we need to come to a moderated approach that more pushes away from this concept of letting technology completely loose and preventing there to be mechanisms that induce consequences for those who misuse it. So systems fail, and so can humans. But that distinction very often matters because of its computer or operator error. In the example of the Boeing 767 MAX aircrafts that continued to crash and fall out of the sky, it became clear that a mitigated software update was required, but Boeing didn't want to necessarily supply the sufficient training time. And instead of getting around a significant mechanical flaw, they tried to cover it up. And of course, the ultimate human cost was significant. Many people died as a result. The entire fleets of aircraft had to be retrofitted and adjusted and have this software installed, and pilots needed to be trained. There was a cost for that. But Boeing attempted to evade it. But imagine, would you tolerate flying on an aircraft if you knew there were even a 20% chance that your plane might just fall out of the sky? We don't tolerate that with other things, right? There's a reason. We'll talk about some engineering principles a little bit later, but there are fundamental concepts to the aspects of science and engineering and principles that dictate many other industries, from which software engineering is one of them. Why is it that we turn a blind eye to those simply because we're trying to move fast and build things, right? So the other question is bias, right? We ourselves as humans are biased. There's no avoiding that. We all have our own cultural, familial, historical distinctions that make us different from one another. But that doesn't mean we can't see those biases and adjust or have those biases changed. But because we ourselves are biased, that bias finds its way into our technologies. So I ask you to be extremely skeptical when you see claims of some technology or AI service being completely fair and unbiased. It's a misunderstanding. Bias is not something that you magically fix and resolve and you're okay. Bias is something that you mitigate by admitting that it exists. It has to go beyond the model. It has to be a process or a policy or a technical control, or better yet, some sort of declaration of understanding. In some ways, much like Anthropic launched their sort of 23,000 word essay on their, core goals and fundamentals from which Claude is trained on, for instance. But in such documents, certain limitations are laid out and made clear. So knowing that some of these systems may be biased at the training phase and then also at their deployment phase, we have to understand those typical patterns so that we can make adjustments to them. Because every portion and every part of the development process embeds certain values. Certain things can be included and certain things can be excluded. This is why purpose-built open source AI is often something that gives me a lot of hope. We can train this technology with very specific, narrow distinctions in mind of very specific things that we want to do. And that with a community input, we're able to tune and adjust based on output. The model is only really the first part, but the values of dominant models will have an enormous impact on their society. First example I'll talk about is DeepSeek. Obviously, DeepSeek is closely governed by the Chinese Communist Party, and it is not a popular thing and not an allowed thing to talk about the Tiananmen Square massacre. So if you ask DeepSeek what happened on that day, it will say, I'm sorry, I can't answer. Would you like to talk about cats instead? Um, this is an intentional choice, right? Obviously, the models were trained on all sorts of historical data, but then there was a control placed at some point for it to not present this information. So this just sets up the fact that companies, governments, corporations, they may have distinctly different incentives when it comes to what they tell their users versus what they tell regulators and the government and what they tell shareholders. All of these components matter, and they're not always transparent or clear at first either. Part of the elements of black box thinking with AI is that we don't necessarily have a tremendous amount of visibility into these concepts, but we have to demand them. Um, More importantly, in many cases, the largest AI models that are being deployed today are being used on a smaller scale. Many companies or startups basically create sort of a thin wrapper over particular models, over Claude, over ChatGPT, being sort of the simplest example, like I said with hotels.com, just slapping a simple chatbot in front of something. Any of those embedded biases will then persist and follow. And we've seen lots of funny examples of this, of somebody having a conversation, with a chatbot about something completely irrelevant to whatever the task is they're trying to achieve, and they end up getting the bot to say something racist or say something absurd. And it's like, wow, I'm trying to order food and this chatbot's like, ranting about some political issue. Don't get me started about Grok. That's a whole other matter. But many of these tools are built on foundational models, which in many cases inherit these biases and they end up propagating. The other thing to consider, especially because we're in Lithuania, many geographic and linguistic biases persist in AI models. Obviously, the model skews towards English content, most specifically in the United States. But there are many cases throughout the world that what is sort of sensible and established and understood in one part of the world that is Western and many cases white, skewing towards sort of whatever are the majorities, so to say, in the West, don't represent the true majority of humanity. And this is a major concern with these large models growing to such a scale. They tend to exclude a very significant portion of the world's population. So very often the solution to this, at least from a smaller perspective, is the ability to have transparency with one's models, with one's ability to express what the technical controls may be towards mitigating this bias again, but not eliminating, as I said, because that's basically not impossible. Former Mozilla colleague of mine from the foundation, Jesse McCroskey, wrote, what does it mean that a few hundred engineers in San Francisco and Shenzhen are effectively setting default values for billions of people? A social media algorithm shapes what you see. An AI model shapes how you think about what you see. It drafts your emails, tutors your children, summarizes the news, and advises your doctor. So this brings us to another element that is problematic with modern AI, is that the consideration of certainty. LLM systems speak with absolute credibility. Our own self-worth is very often built on credibility, and credibility is earned through effort, time, and struggle. There's a concept in psychology called the confidence heuristic. And this is a mechanism that's built into us that we shortcut certainty and trust with the way that someone expresses themselves with certainty. So if you go to a doctor, they're wearing a lab coat, there's an element of trust and the thought that, this doctor had to go to medical school and earn a number of credentials and do their residency, and I trust them. And then doctors move through the world in their fields confidently. And this is how much of our society operates. That confidence is very often that short circuit to enable a sense of trust. Now, the problem happens that when AI speaks confidently, as it does, it triggers a different heuristic that was pinned by S. Shyam Sundar at Penn State University. He called this the machine heuristic, which is again our ability to often incorrectly attribute the same objective expertise to machines as we do with people. Because we have this perceived idea of objectivity that, rationally it's a machine, 1 + 1 is 2, it should be quite simple and transparent. But AI is eroding this confidence because in many cases it's giving people disastrously incorrect information. And it causes people to struggle with trusting their own judgment. There's a growing uncertainty that people can't trust their instincts, that they need to outsource their decision making to this machine precisely because of this machine heuristic concept. So, economic factors that we see in the news quite frequently are those of job displacement, automation, labor market panic. More often now, we're starting to hear about the psychological impacts of this, those around self-worth and the inability to sort of trust your own senses with disinformation flowing everywhere on the internet. AI-generated slop is predominantly filling a lot of social media websites, and now even when you search for particular information on the internet, very often AI content is what you see at the beginning. So obviously, there's a technical aspect to this. Corporations want AI technologies in front of other people, but we're not thinking closely enough about what this is doing to us psychologically. And I'll slightly shift to the idea of what this may be doing to us psychologically as engineers. Because unfortunately, I think it was in another talk just yesterday, or maybe on the first day, one of the closing talks talked about how people judge one another for using AI. In many cases, feel bad about themselves. In some cases, thinking, "Oh, like I used to know how to do that, now I can't," and or judging other people for landing an AI patch, and it kind of seems like it wasn't really looked at very carefully. This undermines so many human elements of what it means to collaborate with one another and to build technology. And unfortunately, we've built a society that's built on friction being the absolute worst thing, right? I'm not saying we have to go back to obviously the Soviet days where you'd wait in line for bread or food, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody wants these situations where you're having to waste time at a government office. Like, we want efficiency. That's a very important thing. We should find ways to do things well. But having a frictionless society is something that Silicon Valley has pushed us to sell us products and sell us subscriptions. Talk about AI as a tool. Now, a lot of the tech industry discussion around AI is focused on hype and its economic impact. We want to shift some of our thinking to an engineering perspective. Silicon Valley has tended to evade our criticism through hype and very bullish claims that automatically put us into the future of thinking, well, just think where we're going to get in 5 years or in 10 years, right? Nobody will have any jobs, everything will be great, right? It diminishes our capacity to think about the problems right in front of us. I'll talk about a very specific case here, but in the United States, for instance, we do not have the sophisticated public transit systems that you have here in Europe. The system of trolleybusy here in Vilnius would be the envy of many American cities. I know that may sound funny, but other than Boston and New York, San Francisco, not many places have this. There are documented cases where city councils abolished plans for tram lines and buses because of promises given by self-driving car companies. And in many cases, a lot of the executives in these companies had close connections with some of the politicians or funded their election campaigns. And as a result, the promises have not been delivered, and these cities are still without the infrastructure that they so desperately need. So I'm going to talk about Geoffrey Hinton briefly. Of course, we all know who he is, famed scholar and Google machine learning expert. A couple years ago, he predicted that radiology would be completely replaced by AI. This was back in 2018. So his idea was that AI technologies would get so good broadly at all forms of radiology that radiologists would not have any work. Now, of the nearly 1,000 FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration in the United States that confers policy as to what medical instruments or procedures can or can't be used, noted that 76% of AI medical uses are for radiology. So, of the many medical specialties, radiology has very much deeply embraced purpose built AI. And of course, this is not LLMs, it's in many cases very classic deployments of machine learning and neural networks. So, the engineering types praise the objectivity of computer reasoning, but senior radiologists rue the outsourcing of this as a bit of a lost art. Just as radiological techniques have improved over time, AI is also improving aspects of radiological science. So this is not one of these cases where, AI is necessarily doing harm. It's doing a lot of good. But it's the rhetoric from corporations and unfortunately from people like Mr. Hinton who claim erroneously that humans will be completely displaced. And the danger of this is that we don't look at what's right in front of us. Right now in the United States, there's a significant lack of radiologists within the medical field. I believe this article talks about a 37% shortfall on radiologists required to just meet the basic demand for radiology. And from the article, he wrote, "The problem with defeatist predictions is that they can always be updated, no matter how many times they've been proven demonstrably false. Last year, Hinton refreshed his timeline, predicting deep learning will now reach parity with radiologists in 10 or 15 years. We don't know. But constantly revising timelines does more harm than it does good. And again, as I said, the danger with boosting and dooming overall is clouding the entire discourse around these type of issues because it short circuits our critical thinking about complex problems, especially when we need to do them. I'll say additionally that what comes up from this is that the idea that growth is an outcome and not necessarily a goal. We hear every organization saying we want to grow, we want to grow. Not necessarily the worst thing, right? Obviously, corporations want to grow, enhance their abilities, hire more people, scale, but growth is the outcome of effective planning, of a good product, right? We're told we live supposedly in a free market where the best product will win because users will flock to it. And I don't need to tell you that that is actually not the world that we live in. The world we live in is about market consolidation. It's about limiting the possibilities of a number of companies. And personally, I find that incredibly sad because I feel many technologies don't get the opportunity to grow because they're competing against behemoths who are essentially waiting to either buy them up or competitively destroy them. I want to talk a little bit about the potential harms we talk about because very often with AI, as we predict and push our time view out into the future, we talk about AGI. And again, we can't predict where this is going. Some say it's hundreds of years away, others say it's 5 years away. But we don't have to just have AI become AGI to harm us. I'm not sure. Have any of you listened to the professor at Oxford, Michael Woodridge? He's a recipient of the Faraday Prize, a speaker for the Royal Society. He just gave a talk recently on AI technology. And he prefaced it by saying, this is not the AI we were promised. While on one hand, AI tools are truly remarkable, they manifestly fail at many of the most basic tests of rational intelligence. For one thing, they simply don't know and can't know what's true and what isn't. And part of what he talks about is this element of jagged capabilities, that certain AI models are exceptionally effective at doing certain things. It's not that all AI should be washed away with and that we shouldn't be using it and pulling away. But his fear ends up being that if we have what's called a Hindenburg moment with AI, it will harm AI research going forward. Companies want to present AI in this very human-like way, but I think it's a very dangerous path to take. We need to understand that these are just glorified spreadsheets. They are tools and nothing more than that. And his fear is that we may deploy AI technologies without fully understanding their consequences and cause a hospital system failure or a deletion of patient records, delivering deadly software updates to self-driving cars, or better yet, normal Tesla cars, bank collapses due to bugs, or public utility failures. So this conflation of human intelligence with machine intelligence, again, as I've talked about earlier, is sort of one of his core ideas. What we're getting is an overconfident AI that regardless of what we ask it, will say, yes, here's the answer. And what he did is said, maybe we need AIs to talk to us in the voice of the computer from Star Trek. Has anyone watched Star Trek? Sci-fi fans? Yeah. I've got a short video here. We'll see if it works. He said, you would never believe it was a human being, and that's a good thing. And the other distinction is with Star Trek computers, which are supposedly programmed with the most sophisticated AI available in the 24th century, there are times they say they have insufficient data. Okay, so we'll see if this works.
Library computer for analysis. The computer report.
Alien life force on board is composed of pure energy, type unknown. Actions indicate intelligence and purpose.
What purpose?
Insufficient data for further analysis.
So I don't know, wouldn't that be kind of nice if OpenAI or some LLM that we worked with kind of said, I don't know, right? It's a little funny take. People say the future isn't what it used to be with Star Trek with all its glowing buttons and everything. But I feel like he's on to something, that we should consider designing our interfaces and systems differently, that instead of by defaulting to give us something, that to truly know its limitations. So to start wrapping up, I want to talk about engineering principles. And again, Silicon Valley has evaded its criticism through hype, and there's a difference obviously between those who manage and talk about products and those who build them. These principles in engineering, which are shared through many different facets of science, exist for a reason. They guide effective design. Engineering constructs all of the fundamental elements of our society. And if it were not for these principles, we wouldn't have safe infrastructure or bridges or water. So in order to make progress, we need to have an understanding of what our fundamental core principles are as we build out from them. So the first is safety, right? Protecting life and the environment above all. Again, we wouldn't tolerate our apartment buildings simply just collapsing while we live in them. And yeah, that does happen sometimes, and there are serious consequences for it. But fundamentally, it is to do no harm. And I think with AI technology, we should set that as our principal consideration, that AI should not harm us. Secondly is efficiency. Aerodynamics and pollution rate reduction, right? We see ways that we can minimize the amount of resources that we use for a given project. Modern architectural design and construction is a marvel at the amount of efficiency they can squeeze out of buildings these days. And many novel experiments show that you can build sustainable, areas in which people live. And sometimes it's incredibly simple solutions taken from nature, or other times they're incredibly sophisticated technical adaptations. Reliability. Does it do what it's intended to, and does it have longevity? I don't have to tell you that things aren't built the way that they used to. I remember my mother still has the gigantic freezer that my grandparents bought, I think, in the 60s, and the thing is miraculously still running. But very often, if you buy a piece of technology these days, it becomes obsolete and breaks, and you can't repair it. That's why there's a greater movement in the United States and throughout the world to have this right to repair. In essence, to create modularity and simplicity in systems so that you can repair the device yourself, a third party can, or if you choose, the manufacturer of the product. Maintainability, the ease of maintenance, which is somewhat similar, but the idea that you reduce downtime through repeated processes of maintenance. Moving on is obviously sustainability, which is the effective use of resources and green design. We're clearly not thinking very well about the environmental impacts of data center buildouts. In many cases in the United States, it really has come down to individual citizens protesting consecutively for weeks in order to prevent some of these data centers being built in their communities that are not having environmental reviews. They're having cases where the development company will find ways to basically bypass all of these standard controls you would have, and essentially to build it, irrespective of what the people in that locality feel. Finally is redundancy, the ability to have backups against catastrophic failure. And then obviously ethics, the social and legal and environmental impacts of what one does. There's a paper that's quite interesting from the 1960s that was sort of supposing how human and technological interfaces will work with one another. So it's JCR Licklider, who said that computing machines will do the routinizable work that must be done to prepare the way for insights and decisions in technical and scientific thinking. That conceptually, an expansion of human capacity by machine, not by the replacement of machine. So work that is routine, repeatable, and with consistent outputs can be done very efficiently with machines. So what do we do with this? I'm going to tell you that I think your human skills matter more than anything. While there are claims of irrelevance everywhere that we're told being human is a tremendous, problem, I'm not going to tell you that you need to be AI first. It doesn't mean don't learn about it. It doesn't mean don't use it, but it means that you need to be a human first off. It's essential that you embrace the value that you have in the fact that you know how to do things, that you have skills that you earned and worked for. And again, it doesn't mean being a Luddite, but it just means more critical of using your AI. Because fundamentally, if you don't choose, someone will choose for you. Because these companies pay very smart people to find ways to make their technologies as addictive as possible. And while we'd like to believe ourselves to be immune, we're not. And again, we're all here because we know how to code in Python. And that's kind of an amazing thing. Learning and growing is obviously your most important trait, and your creativity and understanding of architecture and the way to make unpredictable choices about things is what makes humans brilliant. Empathy, additionally, is an understanding between people. Teams make software, not just people in AI. So, a quote by Werner von Braun, the famed German American scientist who is seen as the father of the US space program, as you likely already know, also devised the V2 rocket that was used in the Blitz to bomb London relentlessly during the Second World War. He stated that science does not have a moral dimension. It's like a knife. If you give it to a surgeon or a murderer, each will use it differently. I find this extremely ironic coming from him, given that half of his career was building rockets to kill people and said, oh, I was just doing it for the science. And then, of course, he made tremendous strides in landing the first people on the moon. But I bring this quote up because it's very easy for us to say that we can outsource the consequences of our technology and simply say it's just the technology, right? We have a responsibility to ourselves and to one another and our fellow human beings to be responsible about our deployment of technology. So, what can we do? Don't be quiet. Don't accept the defaults. Do things in person with people. Don't worry, I have a next slide for each one of these quickly. Delete and refuse, and support human flourishing, passion, and growth. So I want to make sure we have time for coffee, so I'll wrap it up. But don't be quiet. Use your technical knowledge to inform people, and not just other developers, but people who don't know much about technology. Be an advocate for good technology and good policy. It really matters. It may seem a little frustrating to have to explain something to somebody who's not technical, but you could have a profound impact on their use of technology. And if using AI in some way is really good, share that way to do it. Or if you've built something that's really good, definitely share it. But question the unevaluated assumptions and call out big tech nonsense, right? We're technologists, we write code, right? We're in deep with this. When you hear something ridiculous, speak up. I know we don't always have the opportunity at work, just call out the CEO or something, but make sure that you're not silent about what you know. Don't accept the defaults. Defaults are often intentionally designed to take advantage of your will. And you have to understand what the trade offs are because often the cost can be high. Not participating in social media may result in you being excluded from something, but you have to evaluate the trade off, right? But the defaults there are meant to pull you into a technology and keep you locked in. That €1 discount on something, they're banking on the fact that you're never going to delete that app and you're going to keep it. So if something makes a lot of sense, use it, but do so from a place of reflection. And obviously, I be working at Mozilla, find open source alternatives that are built by those with your values in mind. Do things in person with people. Seems obvious, it's really easy to stay home these days, but use technology to organize, but focus on the real world. Come to PyCon like we are here, right? Do these types of events because it gives you the opportunity to connect with others and grow your perspectives. Don't just outsource these decisions to AI, right? Like what we got here together is a lot more powerful than just, spending 3 days vibe coding or something, right? Like we've expanded our collective consciousness tremendously by being together in person. And it also forces you to get outside of your comfort zone. And it's okay to debate and disagree with people. Nobody really has the fundamental answer. But if you can respectfully debate and communicate with people, you might come out of it with a perspective that you didn't expect. That could be the next thing that levels you up as a person or as an engineer. Delete, refuse, and reflect. If you can, just don't use certain technologies and platforms. If you don't need Amazon in your life, don't use it. If you don't need Facebook, don't use it. But articulate these problems, understand them, and it doesn't mean to have to be that annoying person who's always, pissing everybody off and you're saying, "Why are you using that? Don't use it." But if you feel strongly about it, share it with other people and fight the deployment of these technologies in workplaces, schools, and communities. If there's something that's tremendously invasive and frightening and you don't like, get rid of it. Don't use it and talk about it. And finally, support human flourishing and passion and growth. We deserve to have the agency to grow, to develop, to be humans, and to live. And a big part of this is the agency within our workplace. I think we all chose engineering because we like to solve problems and we like to work with people and collaborate. And again, teams write code, not just individuals. And collectively, when we come together and we share this passion and growth, that's when we create the most important outcomes. Thank you very much.